the line. Thank you very much for your time, and good morning to you, sir.
Thanks for having me, please.
I hope you're well.
By God's grace.
Great. Very interesting perspectives you shared yesterday on the matter of vigilantism.
Mm-hmm.
For you, because there are many people who will be of the opinion that, but we no longer see Kandahar boys and all kinds of names. So why should there be that concern? Is there something that's happening that's cause for concern that made you accept to talk about this matter at this time?
Well, thank you once again. Remember, I was invited, like all the other panelists and everybody who was in the auditorium, to attend. So the answer to your question was actually answered or provided by the National Security Coordinator. And recall that he said emphatically that they are picking up signals or have picked up signals that new groups are emerging. And they are using certain guises, you know. And in the discussion, somebody pointed to a group in Bulgaria or somewhere a few weeks ago that was inaugurated and so on. You recall that he drew attention of all of us to the platforms that are being used, including social media and other messaging apps, and that they are following all of those trends. So from the National Security Coordinator, it does appear that there is evidence that the groups are re-emerging or resurfacing. And the general comments that were made by the panelists or some of the panelists was that they might have gone underground. At the time, 2019, when the act was established. Then you have very two prominent panel members, precisely the Honorable Francis Opoku and the Honorable Francis Kandapar. And let's remember that both of them come from the NPP. And yet they were unanimous that the act was a knee-jerk reaction to a situation that had evolved over time, and in 2019, probably at Ayawasu West Wuogon, not necessarily because Ayawasu West Wuogon was a vigilantism event. Okay. But those two gentlemen said that the way and manner in which the government of the day reacted to the situation was not the appropriate way. And that the act didn't even respond critically to the issues that the act sought to address. And I added that if you look very carefully, since 2019, no charge has been preferred against anybody citing provisions of the act. There is no financier of any, vigilante group that has been brought to book. The people that we are referring to, especially those that the Interior Minister 3 days ago mentioned, are the ones that we call foot soldiers. But the act was very emphatic that it sought to prohibit vigilante groups. And remember, there is always an organizer behind a group, aside of the members. It sought to criminalize facilitation of acts of vigilantism. And anybody who encouraged vigilantism, it sought to criminalize funding for vigilante groups. And last but not least, it then sought to impose prison terms and other functions, including disqualification of those who will be found foul of this act. What of these have happened over the 7 years? And strangely, after 7 years, the state is informing us that they are looking for somebody like Double. So I proposed in my initial remarks that Ghana does not have a vigilantism problem because it hasn't got laws. Rather that Ghana has a vigilantism problem because Ghana, the state that we call Ghana, has chosen deliberately not to consistently enforce the laws that it already has, including the criminal offenses and all manner of laws that existed before 2019. And then on top of that, you add 2019. So anybody who might have been charged or brought to court, found guilty or otherwise, would have been brought to court under existing laws, not the Vigilantism Act, which therefore led all of us, including myself, to say that probably even including the Honorable Totubi Kwachi, that either the law is irrelevant because it's not addressing the issues that it sought to address, or plainly speaking, is ineffective. So the Honorable Benjamin Kumbo suggested that maybe we should leave the law in what he termed as residual law, a law that exists but is hardly applied, rather than, and nobody suggested that the law must be probably, I don't know what the legal term is, repealed or whatever, the term might be. So this is where the argument starts or stands. We are not serious about vigilantism, and vigilantism has not gone anywhere. In fact, one empirical observation that I made was that, and I argue that vigilantism is a political problem. It's a political issue. You cannot run away from that. Because the main actors, the principal actors, are political parties, particularly the two major parties who have been ruling this country during the Fourth Republic. You get the picture?
Yes.
So if the two political parties are not willing or prepared, for whatever reason, to deal seriously with this, because they're their members, and we are talking about the chairman of the parties, we are talking about the national secretaries, we're talking about the regional chairs, those are the faces of political parties. Of course, you could include MPs and so on and so forth. They have found very ingenious ways, and I say this is an empirical observation. The ingenious ways, for instance, during the last administration, on the floor of Parliament, the videos are available. The now minority leader then claimed that they distribute recruitment slots and that they had even given some to the NDC at the time that it was in opposition. This implies that political parties, beyond their promises, cannot provide the jobs that their members are looking for, the full soldiers. So one of the avenues is to capture the space that we call recruitment into security services and then absorb those full soldiers. But in the worst cases, people were just taken to. Of course, the former defense minister refuted it. But when you talk to people on the ground in the security services, they were just taken to Shah Hills or whatever to be trained. And even when they mutinied, and somebody like General William Ayamdo dismissed those who mutinied, the instructions were that they must be put back into training. So now the slots are being given. The next phase is that for the first time in the history of Ghana, it is the ministry that has taken charge of recruitment. And the point I was making is that several times the Minister of Interior appeared on TV explaining to Ghanaians how recruitment was going to be done. In the history of Ghana, it's never happened. No minister ever explained to Ghanaians how recruitment was going to be done. If the services determine based on certain technical analysis about how many people were retiring and this and that, the exigencies of the times, and the need to increase the sizes of the security services. The report went to the councils of the security services and then went to cabinet. By and large, it's cabinet that will approve any funding, for the enlargement, expansion, and the recruitment. But no minister ever took the platform. So my empirical observation is that the political parties have captured the space. Gradually, they are now in charge of recruitment. And when NDC leaves and NPP comes to power, in theory, that stage would have cemented the recruitment process. Of course, there are things that I can't say, but some people know, including myself, about lists that go, to security services. List, not numbers. Giving list that these are the people who must be recruited. Let me add, we look now at the well-being of the state of Ghana. Part of this state capture, or the capture of recruitment, was the idea that, there are people who are 30 years, 35, who are strong enough to serve in security services. Who told you that? By the time we had the debate, you see, if you are an ordinary person on the street and you think that you are 35, you are strong, and therefore you must go into the service, you'll be mistaken. But the point is, why the two members of parliament, take the national platform and suggest that the security services, including the armed forces, should increase their recruitment ranges up to 35 across board, not maybe discriminating the specialists, doctors, engineers, those with special skills, who would have taken a few more years to acquire the skills, to join the services, and the nature of whose jobs, wouldn't require too much of physical exertion. So when you sit, like some of us do, analyzing the trends, the conclusion you come to is that the political parties or the political actors or the political class is setting an agenda. You see, and part of that agenda is what Professor Bob Miller referred to. He used the professional term, the political economy of vigilantism. Basically, it means who benefits from vigilantism. And it's political parties who benefit. So if they have made promises, they cannot fulfill the promises because the economy is not expanded. The next question they ask is, where are the avenues that we can use to absorb our boys? You see what I mean? That is the bigger picture. And it brings us full circle, once again, to what the experts, the academics, the professors have suggested. That it all boils down to the nature of the governance system that we have embarked on. The winner takes all. So you can do many things. You can pass Act 999 and so many laws and whatever. If you don't, or we don't address this winner takes all thing, we don't address how political parties are financed, then you're going to have the dynamic where political parties raise expectations, including promises. Those who support them in realizing those expectations then make demands on them, which they cannot fulfill. And part of that dynamic is vigilantism. So we need to have a more broader debate, stakeholder debate. I remember the political parties had been invited and were being requested to answer 2 questions each. But those who are well informed, Dr. Kumbo and the let me call him Ambassador Larry Beblo-Latte, suggested that that was not the appropriate platform. In other words, there should be another platform or other platforms to engage wider segments of society.
I see. Very interesting. Let me start with the matter of the act. I'm sure you've read it yourself. What's your own opinion on the suggestions that, because I heard at some point people asking that it should be treated as a residual act. There's also a proposal of repeal. I'm sure you've read it over and over. Is it a bad act?
Well, the answer is yes and no. In fact, maybe we should reframe the question. Is the act good or bad?
Okay.
Not necessarily to say, is it bad?
Okay.
And if you reframe the question as, is the act good or bad? You have to qualify your answer. And my answer would be that it is both good and bad. You know. And there are reasons why I would make that kind of argument. At least the law has provided a basis or a framework for addressing the phenomenon that we call vigilantism. On the other hand, however, the institutions that must execute the provisions or apply the provisions of that act have failed to do that. You see, and that is baffling. But my straightforward answer is that we should not be baffled. Because those who made the law are the ones who are supposed to implement the law. And they are not prepared to implement the law because they are the people who violate the law. You see, the other side is that Section 10 of the Act, which called on the Minister of Justice to promulgate a set of regulations. In other words, to operationalize the Act, spell out other modalities and ways and means and institutions and responsibilities and functions and so on and so forth. The respective ministers of justice. Remember, from 2019, there was a minister of justice in the form of the Attorney General at the time. There is currently a minister of justice in the form of the Attorney General. They have not paid heed to that Section 10. So if we want to keep the law, we must, the starting point is to now promulgate the Section 10 regulations. And in doing so, we then bring on board the various views that were expressed yesterday in that auditorium. And then widen the debate and have other individuals and groups also express their views on the act, and then use that not to, overhaul the act. In doing so, a few things might change, but then to embellish the act through the regulations. And probably in doing that, which was the argument that Professor Bob Milliard and I think Honorable Kandapa and probably Francis Poku made, that there doesn't seem to be a strong linkage between vigilantism and land guards. That land guards should be treated as land guardism and dealt with in its own act. And then vigilantism of the nature of political violence must also have its act. You see what I mean? So my suggestion would be, can we embark on a process of promulgating the Section 10 regulations?
Okay.
And in doing so, bring in other opinions from across the breadth and length of the country and see whether we can resuscitate the act. If we cannot do that, Then Dr. Benjamin Kumbo is saying that in law, there is something they call residual law. The law is there, it's not working, but it is still on the books. If at any time you need it, you might choose to, invoke its provisions. So there are several options that we have. Bottom line, the political class must take their responsibility seriously. You see, though you and I nobody can get up and form a vigilante group. But even if they do, which is part of the dynamic that Professor Milliard, even Professor Jampo and Co. have written on, is that people can form their groups. Then the political actors will say, oh, that's the demand side. We need such and such service. Then the supplier, they'll go to the supplier, which will be the groups, the 27 names that were listed in the schedule of the act, and then source that service from them. So that's the synergy between the groups and the political actors. Even if the political actors themselves do not form vigilante groups, certain individuals smartly, as a business model, recognize that there is a need for such and such and such. And they will make themselves, available to be used by those who need those kinds of services.
On the matter of, and let me come back to the argument you made, the link between vigilantism and recruitment into the security services.
Mm.
I wonder how that sustains vigilantism, because you're having people, and I'm sure they are supposed to meet some minimal recruitment requirements. How does that sustain vigilantism? And secondly, if you believe that it sustains it, how do we break that cycle?
Okay. First of all, let me once again reiterate that this is only an empirical observation that I'm making based on at least the scenario that we had during the MPP administration.
Okay.
Where a leading member pronounced publicly that the slots were available, they had distributed them and given some to the then opposition NDC. We must not expect that practice ended with the MPP. But even if it ended, I'm also suggesting that the mere fact that during the NDC time, the Minister of Interior publicly takes charge of recruitment into the security services, especially the police, migration, prison services, and so on. It's also an empirical evidence of how the political parties have moved themselves into the space of security services recruitment to take charge for the purposes of pushing the Agoro boys into the services. Now, what could be the motivation for that? I think basically that's the essence of the question you're asking. Isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
The idea is that, remember the other forms in which vigilantism, makes itself evident. Remember how after elections, the Goro boys or party boys take charge of markets and lorry stations, KVIPs, and all manner of facilities that they think their government has come to power, and therefore they have the right, to go and manage those kinds of facilities. It is that expectation that drives people to join groups that are violent, either in rhetorics or in actual physical form, in order that they will draw attention of the political class to themselves. So that when the political class wins power, they then recompense them through different ways, including recruitment, including allowing them to take charge of lorry parks and so on and so forth. So basically, that is that. It is a social dynamic. And again, I need to mention people like Professor Milliard, and I think yesterday Dr. Kumbo and Co mentioned it. That vigilantism is a socio-political issue. So in a socio-political dynamic, there are different ways in which interest groups signal whatever their interests are. It's a very nebulous field. And we cannot run away from the fact that the politicians are aware that they need those groups in order to bolster their chances of winning power. Those groups also know that the politicians also need their services. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And that is why, even on the matter of media communications, the people who make the loudest noises on radio and TV invariably are among the largest class that find themselves, in various positions. Even the rhetoric, the language, the vehemence, the gusto with which you make pronouncements in support of or against your opponent is recognized.
Okay.
So it's about recognition. You see, it's not. I don't know whether I've been able to answer your question.
No, I do get it. Then what do we do?
What we do is that when you pass at 999 and you attach a schedule and say that those listed and any others that are not listed are proscribed, is banned, that is not the end of the story. You see, the groups have structures. They have leadership, they have managers, they have followers, they have financiers. But those boys need their daily bread. They don't normally, even when they recite the Lord's Prayer, give us today our bread. They need somebody to put the bread in their hands. You see. Then some of them are armed. All the incidents that we've had at Tiwa, Tripoli, Akwatia, Ayawasu West, which is again not a classical case. But in many instances when arms were used, there is sufficient evidence to say that the vigilante groups are armed. Which is why people like Her Lordship, Henrietta, what's the surname, please? Henrietta Mensah Bonsu, argue that these are warlords. And some have called them militias. There are meanings to these terms. So beyond putting on paper that you have disbanded them, there must be other processes, including recovering the arms, call it disarmament, from those groups. We didn't do that. If they had bank accounts of their leaders, their accounts needed to be frozen. We didn't do that. So only proscribed on paper, and then we left the groups intact. So Dr. Kumbo and Dr. Honorable Kandapa and Honorable Francis Poku would suggest that they only went underground, waiting for an appropriate time to resurface. We need to take the dismantlement seriously, and then we need to apply the law rigorously. It's a very serious law. In fact, it bars people from holding political office or whatever public office if they are found guilty. So invariably, party chairmen and party secretaries, probably even flag bearers, could be found guilty.
Okay.
And that is why they, the actors, who are the perpetrators of all the crimes under the Act 999, are not willing. And I went forward and suggested that in many instances of how our political parties behave, they have become a club. It's a quid pro quo philosophy That drives how, they do their business. So don't touch me. And when I come to power, I will not touch you. That is how they're operating. So you can have the act, but MPP would not prosecute anybody. And it didn't prosecute anybody. And now NDC is trying to prosecute. If NDC succeeds in prosecuting, then MPP will be encouraged when they come to power to prosecute.
Okay.
But it's not going to happen.
Okay.
The most likely outcome will be that behind the scenes, there will be a gentleman's agreement. Call it ECOWAS agreement. That is why we are where we are. In many, many instances. You see, it's a very dicey situation. And I would join those who suggest that probably, I don't know how to put it, but what is working in the act are the normal criminal offenses, which exist or existed before the act was passed, which makes the act in a way superfluous. So there's some evidence to suggest that proscribe or repeal the act. But then we say once we have passed the act, let's keep it. And let's find ways and means of making it, a bit more forceful in terms of implementation. If we don't, but some of the things that we should be doing is also how political parties are financed. Because political parties go around finding money, they need now to protect those investments. And when we're protecting the investments, it's resorting to vigilantism in order to ensure that the investment yields good outcomes for them to win power.
Okay. Okay.
So we should have the debate within the wider discourse of the nature of our politics.
Okay.
Then vigilantism will be one of the aspects that, we can discuss.
I wonder at your age, when you go to these things, in this particular situation, did you leave there worried or hopeful?
Well, I know you are unaware.
Yes.
Maybe you speak some, I can, or you don't.
Small.
But please permit me to use your platform to give one proverb, which is that a jar and a chair in two as well. A jar is the set of traps that a hunter sets in the bush. They don't set one trap. They set maybe 2 or 3 or 4. Then they create an artificial path in the jungle, using palm branches as a fence behind the trap. And then on this side where the traps are, you have the path. In order to encourage the animals to use the path or the trap and get trapped in the jar. Now, if any time the hunter goes to inspect the jar, the traps, it has caught some animal, then the hunter will be encouraged to extend the length of the jar. Now, I've explained the, what do you call it?
Yes.
The Akan proverb.
Yes.
So if you want to see whether our future is encouraging or not, look at where we have come from. And in many instances, the prognosis is not good. We have retrogressed, but we are making progress very, very slowly. The scenario where the late former President Rawlings said, we take 2 steps, or we take 1 step, then we take 2 steps back. You see what I mean?
Yes.
That is the sense that I have. That our generation is out. Even our children's generation is out. Our grandchildren, with the exception of Professor Bob Milliard, at least in my panel, the rest of us are the older generation in that panel, or on that panel. We cannot boast that the country that we grew up in had become so, had developed so well that life became easier. Those who went to university before you, in their days, in the restaurants, if that is what they call them, they ate their meals and they had coffee and milk or tea, whatever, on the side in dispensers for them to go and drink coffee, cocoa, and so on.
Really?
That has, yes, talk to some of the older generation. Here
Huh?
in UST at least.
I
People
see.
were drinking chocolate.
In
See what I mean?
university.
Yes, at university.
Oh, I see.
Please find some old KNUST, alumni, and ask them what were the conditions of feeding during their age. We moved away from there to the bush chop bars at Lagos, AKSLS somewhere, that kind of stuff. Our road networks have deteriorated. You see, today, after several years of roads, and maybe after this big push, we will still be in a country where after 5 years, after the NDC leaves power, the roads will still be bad. I hope you get a picture.
Yes.
As for the railways, forget about them. The railway network that Kwame Nkrumah left, which reached Kumasi in 1903, today there's no railway in Kumasi. When I came to where I'm living, close to Pokuasi, in 2003, every morning I heard the train moving from Nsawam to Accra. But when it reached Pokuasi, it will blow the horn, that typical railway horn. Today, you don't hear any railway sound or train sound. We talk about in Pakadine, 90-something plus kilometers, and we boast that we have a railway network. We don't have. You see, that's one. There are several instances, that we've not progressed. We are seriously in debt, and yet we have not got an equivalent infrastructure to show that we borrowed so much money. And you see the evidence in the form of schools. In fact, the monies borrowed for education largely go to feed the children. And people would argue that we'll see the results in 20 whatever years' time. But the educational infrastructure itself, you and I know, there are still schools under trees, children on blocks, some lying on their stomachs, and so on. The health infrastructure is no different. You see, in many aspects.
Okay.
The security services, yes, we have security services. But do we have the capabilities, the assets, that they need to perform their functions? Look at fire service. And how many times somebody comes on TV to tell us that they cannot even boast of one fire engine per one district. So if you are in a place like Amasama and you have one fire station sitting somewhere at Amasama, maybe it's not enough, But even that we don't have. We don't have an airline. You see what I mean? Kwame Nkrumah left us with an airline, which was functioning. It's collapsed. Kwame Nkrumah left us with a Black Star Line. Where's the Black Star Line? So if you sit down to analyze, the way and manner in which Ghana has evolved, the one obvious conclusion would be that we have not fared well. And on the basis of that, you cannot project that as a trajectory we are on the ascendancy path. I don't think so. And that is what worries me. So in a way, that dialogue and many other platforms are talk shops. We go and talk. The following day, nothing changes. The same business as usual attitude. And you don't develop a country like that. You see, it's worrisome.
Colonel, thank you. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thanks for having me, please.
Colonel retired FESTUS ABOAGYE. join us on the line. Of course, it was part of that dialogue on vigilantism. They were looking at the Act 999, 7 years after it has been passed. What progress have we made in terms of trying to deal with matters of vigilantism? We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll conclude with our last resource person on this issue. But if you just join us, this is still the Gold Morning Conversation. Please go nowhere. Stick with us.